The Connection Show, inspiring hope, health, and healing, sponsored by Braveheart Workshops, live with Jill Reynolds. And I'm here today at the General Flynn Reawaken Conference in San Marcos, California. And I've had the privilege of running into my great friend, Doug Billings. Welcome, Doug, to the show.
Jill, thank you so much. It's good to be here with you. Finally, we've done a lot of talking about this.
Well, this is the most handsome eligible bachelor in all of the conference. So he's a great friend and has an amazing son, Michael, and an amazing service dog, right, for Michael?
Yeah, Jet the service dog. Yeah,
Jet the service dog. So, Doug, one thing we love to do on the Connection Show is we love to take and connect the dots of story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and take it from your childhood, little Dougie, growing up, to how little Doug became the amazing man you are today, and how God led you into who you are and what you're doing. So would you take us on a journey back into your childhood, not making it look sugarcoat, and tell us all about your childhood and lead us to who you are, because we believe that when people hear your story and look at the similarities of your story with their own instead of differences, that's where true transformation can come into their life. So go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is, since I've started this, I've never been asked that particular question. So good for you. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. The oldest of four siblings. I have two sisters and a younger brother, and a loving family, Irish Catholic family from Kansas City, and I went to the public school system throughout Kansas City. And I think the typical American family, mom and dad worked hard for a living. Mom, when us kids became school-aged, mom went back to work as a school teacher. Dad was in human resources his entire career and did that and worked hard. And we went to church every Sunday. We vacationed as a family during the summers. One of my favorite stories to tell, or one of my favorite questions to ask people, Jill, is what was the first concert you ever saw in your whole life? Because my dad, when I was 10, 12 years old, my dad took me to see Elvis Presley. Elvis was my first concert ever. And so from that time on, I've been a huge Elvis fan. If you catch me at the right moment and the right time out with a group like this of Patriots, we're having dinner, and there happens to be a microphone and a karaoke system, I will sing some Elvis Presley for you, ladies and gentlemen. Yes,
so Elvis was yours. You're going to crack up. You know what my first concert?
What?
Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Oh my gosh.
With Dick Clark emceeing it, and my dad worked for Dr. Pepper, and they sponsored the Dick Clark show. So I got to meet Dick Clark and Paul Revere.
How about that? Woo! You were a wild child back then. We all know the stories. I've seen the reports. So, so I love my dad. My dad was my best friend. Mom and I close, sisters close. Get into the high school years, and throughout my life, maybe it's a Catholic thing, I don't know, but I'd always wondered, do I want to be a priest? Maybe I've got this calling to do something. So I went in my junior year of high school. I went to a high school seminary, a boarding school, and experimented with that idea, tried to discern the idea. Now, I've got to admit to you, Jill, I was 16, 17 years old. Was I really interested in being a priest, or was I just more interested in living at a boarding school away from home and being with some of my closest guy friends? And I really think the latter was the impetus of my call was, gosh, this looks fun. I could live here during the week and kind of like a dorm. It felt like college to a degree. But once I got in, I really did. God did kind of snag me and say, you better think about this. Maybe there is something to this. Mm-hmm. So I did. High school came and went. I went to UMKC, University of Missouri at Kansas City, and had a fairly typical 4-year college career. I worked my way through UMKC as a disc jockey. Kansas City, Q104, KBEQ, a pop radio station at the time that later converted to be a country radio station. And then that calling came back again. My senior year of college, I left UMKC, went to North Carolina at a radio station, worked there for a year, but this calling about priesthood came back into my life again, and I thought, well, gosh. And so at this time, I'm 23, so I decided to go back to UMKC first and finished my degree in communication studies and broadcasting, did that. And then I went back to the college seminary, which, of course, different than the high school, and spent 1 year at a Benedictine monastery in northwestern Missouri, had 1 year of discernment, and decided, no, perhaps marriage was my vocation, my priesthood was not. I do not regret that year, because it was during that year of discernment at Conception Abbey in northwestern Missouri where a wise monk, we got into deep philosophical conversations, the meaning of life, and that was really one of the questions I had, and I still, I love the topic of why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Why was I born? And a wise monk at the seminary wrote, and I asked the question in class, what is the meaning of life? Everybody talks about it. And the monks, he said, that's interesting. Since the time of antiquity, since the time men and women were able to reason and grapple with it, we've always wondered, why are we here? Why? And of course, in the Christian tradition, we are all, we're called to follow Jesus Christ. We have, the Old and the New Scriptures, the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew tradition, the New Testament, the Old Testament. We have various names for those books, but we're all of the same ilk. Our primary calling is to follow Jesus Christ. But at the same time, I think that Jesus wants us, part of that meaning of life, why we're here, and this is what the monk said that has resonated since that time, is that we are called to enter into the lives of others to make differences for the better. Mm-hmm. And that has remained with me since that, when I was 23. When I was.
And if I can interject there, because I am so grateful you said that, Doug, because have you been following or had the chance yet to watch any of the Chosen series?
Oh yes, only the very beginnings of it. So I have not all of it. But
okay.
Yes.
Well, this is divine. Okay, this is divine. Yeah. So when God told me to have the tagline of this show, Hope, Health, and Healing in the World, and I tried to figure out what he was trying to say. Hope in Him, health of our body because our body's the temple of the Holy Spirit. And then healing of our mind, Doug, for the transformation going back to the 4 generations of sin. Because we have that 4 generations of sin. And by taking those generational sins back, then there's space to bring in God's blessings. So what I found fascinating is when God said, when you do the connection show and you interview people and they connect the dots of their life, and people hear your story today, Doug, and they'll go, wow, I can relate to this, I can relate to this. That's where transformation begins. And when you think about it, Doug, because you studied this from Catholicism, I'm sure, when Jesus walked the face of the earth, he shared parables, accounts, and stories for transformation of the people on the mountainside hearing those stories. Jesus didn't get on the mountaintop and start preaching the gospel. I mean, he didn't go up there and say, okay, open your Bibles today and let's memorize, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins. But he went on the mountaintop, Doug, and he shared story for transformation. So take off on that, because that's where I think many of us miss the essence of God, is we as believers are to share our story to transform the lives of others, to lead them to Him.
Amen, Jill. For me, we all have stories. We all have different, each of us has a way that we prefer to express our faith. Mm-hmm. So there are some of us that are Methodists. There are some of us that are Lutherans. There are some of us that are non-denominational. There are some of us that are Catholic, and so forth and so on. Christianity and a belief in Jesus is so personal that when we tell stories about how did you get here, what led you to this, that mantra of mine, to enter into the lives of others at key moments and make differences for the better, is one of the key definitions of the meaning of life for me. I think we're called to do that. So what does that mean? So when I left the seminary, when I went into the real world, corporate America, that mantra was resonating with me. So I went in, I began my professional career after the seminary, I'm not called to be a priest. What's the next best thing? What's the next best avenue for me to enter into the lives of others at key moments to make differences for the better? And for me, the decision was to be a teacher. So I went back to school at UMKC, got a master's degree in education, and I was trained to be an English teacher. Now, as it turns out, when I'm applying for schools and for jobs at various schools, I applied to a couple of Catholic high schools in the Kansas City area, And when they heard and learned of my seminary experience, they said, hey, we know that you're trained to be an English teacher, but we really need a theology teacher. How would you like to do that? And I said, I would love to do that. And so, of course, half of me really did want to do that. The other half just desperately wanted a job. So yes, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Well, I just found that to be one of the best experiences ever. The topic of theology, the discussion you have with these kids in high school about their faith and about Jesus. And just for everybody in the audience, Jill, not every kid that's in a Catholic high school is Catholic. There are many who aren't. And so we get all of these great discussions about faith. Of course, we're talking about the Catholic interpretation of faith, but the stories that the kids and I would share just did my heart so good. It was so interesting, the depth to which I saw kids reflect upon and struggle to understand their faith and how to express it. For me, it was like a succession plan. Here's the next generation of kids. They're going to be adults. They're going to be the next generation of leaders, and it did me good to see that. And so, teaching became a mechanism for me to experience a way to express the meaning of life, of how to enter lives, and make differences for the better. Now, as many teachers do over the summer months to make extra money, because let's be honest, teachers don't make a lot of money. I took a job at Sprint back in the day in their HR department to develop training for them. My master's was in curriculum and development, so I helped them develop training for their training department. And it was an internship, a paid internship, and I made more money over the summer than I did all year teaching school.
Especially private schools.
Yeah, yes, right, especially, yes. So I wrestled with that. I thought, gosh, I mean, I'm making so much more money here in the corporate world, but can I give up? How can I possibly satisfy that urge of that meaning of life to enter into the lives of others and make differences for the better in the corporate world? Well, as it turns out, I was hired on by Sprint in their HR department, and HR is the perfect opportunity to enter into lives and make differences for the better. And so for the next 23 years, to make a long story short, I was an HR executive in corporate America and did a little time with Sprint, went into some manufacturing, ended up in the healthcare industry. And that brings us, all along that time I got married and divorced, unfortunately. And I have two sons, Michael, the youngest at 19, and Grant, the oldest. Great boys, wouldn't trade anything, nothing about them I would change. Grant is a typical 28-year-old man, and Michael is a 19-year-old student in college. Michael happens to have Down syndrome. High-functioning kid, love him. And I'm telling you, and you've met him. Mm-hmm. If God were to come down and say, hey, Doug, I'd be happy to make Michael a typical kid for you if you like. I can get rid of this Down syndrome thing if you'd like. I would get down on my knees and respectfully decline God's offer. Michael's perfect just the way he is.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
And it may not have been your story, but I think it's imperative to pause here a moment because it could just be me doing transference. My husband, Larry, his oldest son was born with brain tumors and has had multiple surgeries, and his brain seizes all day long. And he actually lived in Kansas City when he was in his youth because he had to always be institutionalized for safety reasons. During that family time with 5 children and Jason being the oldest, it put a lot of strain on their marriage, which eventually led to adultery and his ex-wife and all this stuff. Through as much as you and your former wife love Michael because he's amazing, did his circumstances have any effect on your marriage or not?
It did not.
Okay,
no,
that's great.
Yeah.
Where are you at then? What led to your divorce? If you're comfortable with that,
or Jill, you can ask me anything.
No, and you don't have to answer it.
This is how people heal and how people learn. And I want your audience to know Doug Billings. It was mutual. It was there's always two sides to every story. At the beginning of a divorce, it's never fun. It's never pleasant. Nobody really wants to go through that process. I don't know anybody who gets married with the intent of, I'd just love to be divorced one day. But things happen. People aren't meant to be together, and like it or not, sometimes it's just best. And I would, Michael's mother and I, and I've been married twice, just to be fully transparent. And Grant has, and I did not want to go through that first divorce process at all. She left. She just left. Now, the second, Michael's mom, we get along fabulously now. Fabulously. I mean, Michael's 19. He can come and go as he wants. If he wants to be, now he's a daddy's boy. He likes to be with Dad, especially at these events. He loves He loves to work the room. He loves to come out and get on stage and wave to the crowd and all that. Grant would have nothing to do with that, but that's okay. They're two different kids. But we get along splendidly. We co-parent. If he wants to go to mom's, he goes to mom's. If he wants to come over, and we've pretty much always been like that. We never went to war with each other. So I know that in some ways that's unique.
Was it more like just falling out of love with each other and then just kind of saying, let's go our separate ways?
To some degree, that was, we were, without getting into too much detail, I'll just say that we weren't compatible. We just were not compatible. Mm-hmm. And it took a few years for us to figure that out, and we brought Michael into the world. I have no regrets, wouldn't change anything. So that's a little bit about that story.
The sad one, though, like you said, is the other wife that you had was the desertion, and many people, I'm sure, listening can relate to when you're deserted by a spouse, and it leaves such a hole in your heart. And, from what I've read, and, I never do judgment, the two, I guess I want to use the word in quotes, acceptable causes for divorce per se is desertion or adultery. So, there's nothing you can do when your spouse leaves you and you want the marriage and they're gone.
Right. And it took me a long time to get over that, Jill. There were years, I think Grant was probably 5 or 6 years old by the time I was finally giving up on the prospect of her, because he was only 20 months old when she left. So he was just a baby.
Did she take him with?
Well, she and I did kind of battle about that. We always had joint custody. She was what they call the residential parent, but so I had the typical dad every other weekend, once during the week, until he got to be old enough to say, I'd like to rather go over the day. And then by that time, the pain, the animosity settles to a degree, and you begin to get along. She and I did not want to lose her. I did not want the divorce, and that was a tough one for me. It took a number of years before I decided to accept the fact, because I just don't come from that background. My parents never divorced. Now, I saw mom and dad have their arguments, but never a severe argument. Nothing. If they ever had one of those, I assume they took it to the bedroom or they took it to a different room of the house or something. But I never saw mom and dad scream at each other and this and that. I saw them disagree and have conversation, which was, I think, good. Yeah. But I never saw them get violent or mad or have a rage. So, the thing about it, I think that God. Here's the thing, we're at a conservative conference. We're at the Clay Clark, Michael Flynn, Reawaken America conference. There are conservatives here that are facing any number of different issues in America and around the world. And part of the lessons that I've learned from dealing with those things, with divorce, children, life in general, whatever, is that life, here's what I believe, life, no matter what, you guys in the audience, ladies and gentlemen, life is always wonderful. Always, despite what you're going through, in spite of every adversity, challenge, or tragedy, this life is always wonderful. Now, there might be days and weeks and months where you're in the muck of some junk in your life and you're going, oh my gosh, I can't take it. But this is the key. In the midst of every challenge, of every adversity, and every tragedy, Jill, there are blessings waiting to be born in every single one. And sometimes it takes hindsight to realize that. But to anybody out there who's struggling with anything, divorce, the death of a loved one, this COVID nonsense, that, mandates, whatever, there are blessings waiting to be born from all of that. We each have a pack of blessings on our back, every single one of us. And I believe that this life was designed on purpose by God to be filled with wonder, joy, and meaning. I really do believe it.
Well, and thank you for saying that, Doug, because, if you really do have a relationship with Jesus Christ, the number one thing to know is Jesus rose and he's alive. And if we've invited Jesus into our heart, then we're alive with him. And when we have that life of him living in us, he tells us to have a pure heart filled with his love and his joy. So it's amazing. I just went to an amazing leadership conference, Doug, in Branson with Connie Witter's ministry, Because of Jesus. And there were 70 leaders there and pastors from different churches sharing about God's grace. And so when we hold on to God's grace and his pure joy and love, all of this crap in the world is so small compared to that.
Yeah.
So take us, what I'd love in closing here, Doug, take us to how you went from it was Sprint?
Yeah.
Sprint. To what you're doing now.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it began at Sprint, and I ended up with various other companies, but kind of rose through the ranks in the world of HR. Okay, so I was in HR, an HR executive in corporate America, and so when COVID hit, February 2020, back in the day when there was 10,000 deaths listed, in quotes, I always put that because they say 10,000. I did, in the healthcare industry, we had access to death certificates throughout the country, and I told my staff, I said, I'd like to do a study on the death certificates in the United States that are attributed now to COVID. So 10,000 at the time deaths that they're blaming on COVID. Because I want to see if what we're really being told is the truth with regards to contagious, if it's ultra contagious, if it's deadly. What do these people have in common? Is there anything they all have in common, these 10,000? So again, long story short, of the 10,000 people that were listed at that time of being dead from COVID, only 222 of them actually died from COVID when it was the primary cause of death. Everyone else died of a multiple competing pre-existing condition. So, and of those 222, every single one of them were over the age of 73. So I began to connect those dots early on and went to the executive committee and said, I'm not, as the HR leader of this organization, I'm not going to mandate masks. We're not going to social distance. Here's the numbers. And what we're doing is not only wrong, it's immoral. We're fudging the numbers. If they have COVID, we're saying that they died of COVID. And that is, as you know, that's two different stories.
And where were you working at this time?
I was with a healthcare, or I would rather not name the company.
That's okay.
But I was with a major company that owns hospitals.
Okay.
And so I went to the executive board and did this, and they 2 weeks later they furloughed me. Mm-hmm. So I was basically fired. They gave me a year package, and I thought, well, this is absolutely crazy. I'm going to start talking the truth. So I started what you're doing. I converted a spare bedroom in my house into a studio, and I began The Right Side with Doug Billings, and we talked about truth, reality, and hope in America during the age of COVID and now beyond, the theft of an American presidential election, all of the stuff that we've encountered since February 22. So and I tapped, I guess, a little bit of my TV and radio experience from my college days, and I began the podcast. And it has just, it's a God thing. It is. We get 4 million people a month or so that stop by, and it's incredible. And I've been blessed by meeting so many, becoming friends with General Michael Flynn, Mike Lindell, and just to name a couple.
Wow.
But it's been incredible.
So, I've heard, and you can tell me if this is what you heard too.
Okay.
I've heard that you're kind of like the up and coming Rush Limbaugh. Is that what you've heard too?
You're nice to mention it. I have been. There are a few people out there. General Michael Flynn was the first one to say that. Glenn Beck, Linwood, some others have said it. That I remind them of Rush Limbaugh, and General Flynn is adamant that you are going to be the next Rush Limbaugh. Now, Jill, so all of that is very nice to hear, and it's flattering and it's humbling. Ladies and gentlemen, there will never, ever, ever be another Rush Limbaugh. And just to be mentioned in that sentence is nice. And on my show, you'll notice I have a gold microphone, and some people think that that's an ego statement. You're trying to be right. I said, no, this was a gift. One of my very best friends, who happens to go by the name of the Commander's Artist, you've met him at Branson at our events and so forth. He's the commissioned artist of General Flynn. He gave me that microphone. And so to honor my friend, I have the mic. That's as simple as it. It's not a Rush thing. Now, Rush had a golden mic, but also on the set of my show is a picture of Rush Limbaugh that when I met him, he autographed it. And the highlight of my career, at least as a podcaster, was that 3 weeks before he died, I was on Rush's show as a caller, called in, and I just told him, and I talked to him about my story, about the meaning of life. And I told him, I said, Rush, I know what you're going through. I know that time is limited. I want you to know that throughout your career, you have fulfilled the meaning of life by entering into the lives of others to make differences for the better. And Rush almost broke down, and he went into a very long conversation with me about that. It was the best thing ever, and I miss the guy. There will never be another Rush.
No, and even though I said, that I've heard that you're the up-and-coming Rush,
yes.
What's even more blessed is you are the up-and-coming, fabulous child of God, Doug Billings. And
Thank you. Amen.
God has a special plan in your life, Doug, and I've had the privilege of getting to know you, and I'm just so blessed. So before we close, would you just give your website and how people can find you? And I'll have this on the podcast too, so they can reach out to you.
Thank you, Jill. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you would do me the honor, you can visit dougbillings.us. Dougbillings.us. Peruse the website, look at it, and if you feel so moved to support us, there's a sponsorship and membership tab over there, and you can take a look and see what's over there. But I appreciate you all very much. And Jill, I just want to mention to your audience, I appreciate becoming your friend in private life, and I appreciate what you're doing, because Jill, you are entering into the lives of others to make differences for the better. And you're going to make an Irishman weep. But you are a good, dear person, and I really do cherish you. Thank you.
I love you dearly. Thanks so much, Doug. God bless you all.
So long, everybody.